Hello and welcome to World Talks on TVP World with me, Ashim Kumar. World leaders are gathered in Munich for a three-day security conference which started on Friday. Amongst the many topics on the agenda have been the future of Ukraine, including the possibility of international peacekeeping boots on the ground and controlling the borders of Europe to prevent mass illegal migration. Additionally, a US lawmaker familiar with the issues said on Saturday that talks to end the war are planned between senior US and Russian officials in Saudi Arabia in the coming days. What can we expect from all of this activity? Well, to lay it out for us, we're joined by Krzysztof Jaworski, Deputy Director, Institute for Security and International Development, and a regular contributor. Welcome, Mr. Jaworski, TVP World, and thank you for taking the time on this early morning. So, lots happening. Of course, the security conference has thrown up all kinds of questions about, the US attitude and so on. But I want to start with the talks planned in Saudi Arabia. How do you see the contours of that situation? For example, why Saudi Arabia? Why is Ukraine excluded? Why is the EU excluded from those talks? What's going on?
To start with, why the EU is excluded from these talks, it seems that, as Pete Hegseth said in Europe, values and diplomacy are important, but at the end of the day, what matters is hard power. And EU lacks hard power and lacks capabilities which could make it get into its negotiations and avoid being excluded by US. But as it seems now, US is the power which holds this key to settlement of Ukraine's war, and US decides. At the same time, I think that it's kind of pressure by US at Europe, both when it comes to making Europe pay more for its own security and creating more capabilities. It is going two ways. It's imposing fear on Europeans' elites that they cannot be secure because US can withdraw its troops from Europe. It's kind of making Europe relieve American forces because the solely peer competitor for US is China, of course. And at the same time, I think it's kind of pressure of Trump administration at European elites, which were criticizing Trump for many years, which were enemies of Trump's politically. So it is kind of influencing internal European politics and maybe trying to replace these elites by some other parties in Europe, which Trump's administration is already supporting in several ways. So,
for example?
For example, in UK, some information operations, let's call it this way, especially when it comes to Musk and X against Keir Starmer, it's kind of such influence, but at the same time in Germany, Alternative für Deutschland was supported again by Musk, who is now official of Trump's administration, and at the same time powerful and influential person in this information sphere.
Understood. Okay, so you've explained why the EU is not involved in those conversations. What about Ukraine?
Ukraine, as you can see, is of course dependent to some degree on US and US support, but at the same time Ukraine is trying to leverage its influence in these negotiations. As we seen yesterday, Zelensky didn't sign didn't sign paper regarding rare earth metals in Ukraine. So yes, Ukraine can have some degree of choice, of pressure, but again, they aren't self-sufficient when it comes to military effort. So the US is the power which can decide who talks and with whom, but cannot dictate the final outcome. It needs to pressure several actors to try to maximize its own profit, of course, at the same time to minimize costs.
So essentially, Ukraine is delegating its security, its future, and its position generally vis-à-vis Russia entirely to the United States. Risky, isn't it?
Well, I don't think that they are delegating it. They cannot.
They don't. Who else is speaking on their behalf?
Yes, they don't have choice, but they are trying to make their best. So I think that situation in which is Ukraine and Zelensky is dramatic in some way, is tragic in some way. But at the same time, after 3 years, they achieved a lot vis-à-vis Russia, because Russia is much more powerful than Ukraine, and yet Ukraine still stands, and Ukraine even have some territory of Russia under its forces. So I think we can tell that Ukraine's government, that Zelensky, that's Ukraine army, made quite good effort during these 3 years.
Okay, well, certainly I think many people would agree with that. I want to move on now to a conversation between US Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, ahead of high-level talks between Washington and Moscow next week. What do you read into that conversation? Why did it happen? What was the intention?
So the intention of Trump, it was already signaled a few days ago, is to get to the settlement of Ukraine's war. So it started with talk between Putin and Trump, and now it's going further with talks between foreign ministers, with talks between some special groups which are discussing the possible outcomes of these peace talks. So I think it's part of this process. And in my opinion, it is interesting that these talks were opened by, well, at the first glance, give it a lot to Russia, but we will see what happens next, because at the same time, it is kind of possible trap for Russia, because they will happily get included in these talks, and then during these talks, US can add more and more requirements, and it could end not so favorably for Russia.
Right. So I mean, it's interesting you mentioned that. I mean, Trump has already said that he thinks kicking Russia out of the G7, it was G8, of course, before was a mistake. The conversation, as we understand it, between Marco Rubio and Lavrov was on topics which are broader than Ukraine. Yes, for example, the Middle East. It sounds as though America is bringing Russia back into the international conversation. Isn't that simply rewarding Putin for his violence?
In some way, it may be kind of rewarding. It depends on the further outcomes of these talks. But yet, I think it's something really cheap for US to give Putin at the beginning of this negotiation, because it's mainly about some talk.
It's a negotiating tactic.
And if we look at, for example, military field in Ukraine, Trump administration didn't criticize Ukraine even once for using drones to attack refineries, to hitting deep inside Russian territory. US weapons is being constantly sent to Ukrainians. When we talk about these drones, it was 7 attacks in January. In February, already 5 attacks. So I think it's some kind of game. And when Trump is talking really nicely to Putin and offering something in words, at the same time he is okay, and he is supporting much more harmful hits inside Russia.
Understood. So essentially, you're suggesting that Trump has Ukraine's back. The final outcome is going to protect Ukraine's national integrity. Is that what you believe?
Yes, I think that U.S. administration of Trump was quite clear about it, that sovereignty of Ukraine isn't on the table. It must be guaranteed. But at the same time, they are not willing to risk a lot and to bear a lot of costs, for example, to get back all of Ukrainian territories, because Russia could defend this and could be in this war much more time. And for US, the main feature, the main peer competitor is China, of course. So, well, they are trying to maximize their profits, like with these rare earth elements, and to make other pay for it, which is really typical for Trump, and which is in great accordance with his Make America first and make America great again.
The art of the deal. The art
Yes,
of the
the
deal,
art of the
Mr.
deal.
Jaworski. Okay, so in the last couple of minutes that we have left, what other issues have come out which have really resonated with you from the Munich Security Conference?
So the main thing is this message that Vance brought to Europe, and it's about internal things. It's saying that in his optics, the main threat for Europe, isn't external powers like China or Russia, it is within Europe. So it's, I think, on the one hand, pressing Europe to make its own defense more on its own costs, of its own expense, but at the same time, I think it's, well, ideological, because Trump's team was criticized previously by European mainstream, and now they are repaying for it, and they are trying to influence Europe to have counterparts which are closer to them when it comes to these other matters. And I think it will be something interesting to look about, having in mind that there are some elections ahead in Europe, like in Germany in 2 weeks, or Romanian election, which Vance as well mentioned and criticized the fact of cancelling elections by Constitutional Court in Romania. So I think good and calm days for Europe are end for some years.
Yes, I mean, as you say, you know, countries like Hungary, countries like Romania, the opposition party in Romania, have applauded J.D. Vance's words. Do you see a rift forming within the European Union? Because many other European Union countries, like, of course, Germany and France, have not been terribly happy to hear the Vice President's speech and the things that he said. Is there the danger that there's going to be disunity in the EU as a result?
I think it is deepening already existing polarization which goes across each country, which goes across mainstream political parties and populist, so-called populist parties, which are counter-elites willing to take power.
Has the speech made it worse?
Yes, I think that it made it worse because, well, if US shows that there is alternative, there is maybe possible support from US as first power in the world, I think it both makes political parties which they are supporting within Europe more willing to take power, more energetic, more effective, and at the same time is something which can influence public opinion.
Understood.
Because yes, this is not longer some margin.
Yes. It's no longer a fringe opinion. It's now mainstream. Mr. Jaworski, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your analysis with our audience. Have a good day.
Thank you very much.
And that's all from us in this episode of World Talks. Goodbye.